I'm Rick Holmes. I'm the town historian here in Derry, and I'm here at the Frost Farm because they invited me to put up an exhibit on Robert Frost because the theme of the garden show this year is Robert Frost. So I have assembled a bunch of memorabilia from our collection at the town museum at 29 West Broadway, and hopefully it's doing honor to the great poet. Now, Robert Frost came here in 1900, absolutely a failure. He had dropped out of Harvard, he had dropped out of Dartmouth, he tried to raise chickens over in Methuen, taught at a one-room school for a while, had a wife and 2 children, and couldn't seem to earn money at anything, and just always seemed to have sand in his feet. I always wanted to move on and find some new thing to do. Undependable. Well, his family, his grandfather particularly, said, all right, what I'll do is set you up in a farm. You find a farm at a bargain rate, and I'll buy it for you. Well, they looked at one in Pelham, and finally they settled on Derry, and they bought the old Magoon place, and Robert Frost came here. He came in 1900 with 300 white Wyandotte chickens. And that was all it said in the Derry News about Robert Frost. Buying the Magoon place and coming with 300 Wyandotte chickens. Built some chicken coops, had a hired hand come in to teach him how to do it, how to raise chickens. And for those first 5 years, that's all he did, was try to be a farmer. But Robert Frost was not a good farmer. Some neighbors would call him lazy, eccentric. He believed that he should be able to train his cows so they get milked at noontime. He did not believe in early milking. So that first 5 years, he was a failed farmer, wrote some articles for poultry magazines with some absolutely wrong facts in them, so everybody in town thought that Robert Frost really wasn't worth looking at, listening to, or shaking hands with. He wrote an article that was distributed national about chickens roosting in trees. All right, and chickens don't roost in trees. So after 5 years, he was just not making it as a farmer. But during those 5 years, he said he had nothing except for time. And that's where almost all of his great poems were written, or the ideas came from, those first 5 years. Then after 5 years, he had to get a job. So he applied to the town schools, the district schools, and Dr. Walk took his application and just threw it back at him. Wouldn't even open his letters of recommendation, because all Dr. Walk knew was Robert Frost was a failed chicken farmer, just a man who could not be respected. So he finally found his old friend from Massachusetts, knew a member of the Board of Trustees at Pinkerton Academy. So Reverend Marion said, all right, I can get you a job at Pinkerton if you read a poem before the men's league dinner. Robert Frost said no. He had never read in public before. So Dr. Marion said, I will read it for you. You just sit there. They read it at the men's league dinner. They loved it. He got the job at Pinkerton. He became very famous as an educator, as a teacher of English. They sent him around the state teaching other teachers how to be teachers. He got a job at Plymouth State College, saved the money, went to England, where he finished that first book, got to know poets like E. E. Cummings and Eliot and all those, and became very famous. And that first book, they heard about it in the United States and republished it here. And the rest is history. And Robert Frost, for the rest of his life, would always credit Derry as being that place where lightning struck, where he got his poetic voice. Without Derry, and if he had not got that job at Pinkerton, he probably would have stayed a chicken farmer in Derry. and died in Derry. And after he died, they would have thrown away those scraps of paper. So Derry is the town that made Robert Frost. When I was a boy, a lot of us could still quote Longfellow or Holmes by heart. Today, is there any poet that people can quote except Robert Frost? You know, stopping by woods on a snowy evening. How many times did you hear "and miles to go before I sleep"? You know, so Robert Frost has become America's poet, and I don't think there's any poet now who's better known. And we're talking about how many years after he died in 63, so we're talking 40 some odd years after his passing. He's still America's favorite poet. Anyone who wants to come to the museum can pick up a copy of The True Story of How Robert Frost Wrote Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. And he actually wrote it right by Clam Haven on 28 bypass. We have everything from stuffed chickens to little models of the Frost home, and those models were produced in England. No matter where you go, any place in the world, you will find people who know and love Frost. In fact, every year, people from about a dozen countries come visit the Frost farm, and many of them come from Japan. You know, Japan, Robert Frost is more popular there than I think in the United States. We have scenes from Pinkerton Academy up there, and then I have 3 first editions, and they're autographed, of his first 3 books. And some of his first poems were published in the Pinkerton Critic, like There's the Last Minstrel. Now, there is a picture of the house as it appeared in 1946. At that time, it was just a farmhouse of no distinction. And by 1961, the whole farm was a junkyard. Hundreds and hundreds of junk cars. And it was called Frosty Acres. And Robert Frost was highly insulted. In fact, he came here in 1936 to scatter his wife's ashes at the farm. And when he saw what the farm had become, he couldn't do it. And so we have things like that when Robert Frost last came to town, or pictures of him at Pinkerton, or on the cover of Time magazine, or being sent to Russia. Right the year before he died, he took a tour of Russia sent by the State Department. He spent 2 hours in conversations with Nikita Khrushchev. And according to the story, he actually persuaded Khrushchev to the wisdom of America through his poetry. Yeah, and when I was a little boy, I saw Frost come to town that last time. I saw him just a little white-haired guy in the distance. But
in 1961, you mentioned the junkyard.
Yeah.
That it had become the Frost homestead. How did that get resolved?
Well, when Frost was in town, when Frost was in state in 1954, you know, he went to John Pillsbury, who was Public Works for the state, public service, and he persuaded Pillsbury that it would be a good idea to buy his farm and clean it up and make it into a museum. And it took a while. You know, by 61, Frost had become more of a legend than ever because he spoke at John Kennedy's inaugural. So after Frost's passing, the state went in there and bought the farm and made it into the museum it is today.